The Ohio winter night pressed against my skin like 1,000 shards of glass, the kind of cold that crept into your lungs and stayed there, numbing everything from the inside out. I was 20 years old and I had never felt so small or so powerless as I did curled up in the cramped trunk of my parents' old sedan. The air was thick with the stench of gasoline and rust, each breath shallow and ragged, each heartbeat hammering in my ears as if trying to escape before I couldn't anymore. The space was suffocating. Darkness swallowed me whole, a tomb without air holes, a coffin lined in steel. I pressed my palms against the frozen lid above me, pounding until my knuckles stung. But the sound was dull and empty, muffled inside this chamber where no one wanted to hear me. My throat burned from screaming, yet outside there was only silence broken by a sound that froze my blood. It was my sister Victoria's laughter, muffled but sharp, carrying through the metal as if poison could seep through steel. She was 3 years older, stronger, angrier, and far more reckless. Her voice danced with cruel delight. "Sleep tight, little nurse," she jeered, mocking the career I had worked so hard to build. "You think you are better than me, but tonight you will learn." I pressed my face into my coat sleeve, trying to breathe past the panic, but nothing could stop the images racing through my mind. What if no one opened this trunk again? What if my lungs clawed for air that would never come? What if my body froze stiff before dawn, and my dreams of becoming a nurse turned into nothing but unfinished textbooks on my desk? I pounded harder, tears streaking down my cheeks, only to freeze against my skin. My chest rose and fell in panicked bursts, every inhale a battle, every exhale a surrender. Then through the steel came another voice, calm, deep, authoritative. My father Daniel. To the neighbors, he was a respected hospital board member, a man of influence and reputation. To me, in that moment, he was the executioner who had chosen silence over my survival. "It is just Sister Fun," he said, his tone carrying that cold dismissal I had known my whole life. No anger, no horror, not even curiosity that his youngest daughter was locked in a trunk on a freezing night. Just Sister Fun. My stomach twisted violently. Fun? Was this fun? Was my sister's cruelty nothing more than entertainment in their eyes? Was my terror just another story to laugh about over dinner tomorrow? The words burned hotter than the cold ever could. I screamed until my voice cracked into nothing but hoarse gasps. I kicked against the walls until my legs cramped, but my father's sentence had already been passed. Silence. Behind him, my mother Evelyn whispered something too faint for me to catch. Perhaps another excuse, perhaps another plea for peace at the cost of my body. The Morgans were admired in our small Ohio town. A perfect family in public polished speeches at church, gracious smiles at charity galas. But inside these walls, truth rotted like mold, hidden beneath layers of paint. And in this trunk, I was the rot they chose to hide. Minutes bled into hours or maybe seconds, stretched so long they felt like centuries. My fingers went numb. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. Claustrophobia pressed down tighter than the steel itself. I whispered prayers into the darkness. Please, God, help me over and over until even my own voice sounded foreign. The world outside did not hear. Victoria's laugh had faded into the night, replaced by silence more terrifying than noise. I thought of Megan, my best friend, waiting for me in class next week. Would she wonder why I never showed up? Would she think I simply gave up? Would she ever know that while she studied under warm light, I was buried alive in a car parked in my own driveway? I thought of my textbooks left open on my desk, of the exam I had studied so hard for. I thought of the patients I cared for as a CNA on overnight shifts, their breaths shallow, their hands trembling in mine. I had promised them care and compassion, yet here I was, gasping for air, with no one to care for me. The irony cut deep. Time became meaningless. My body shook violently from both cold and terror. My lips turned numb. My eyes fluttered heavy with exhaustion, but I forced them open. If I closed them, I feared I might never open them again. Then at last, when dawn bled across the horizon, faint light seeped through the cracks around the trunk. Footsteps crunched on frozen gravel, heavy and deliberate. My heart lurched. The lock clicked. The lid lifted. Pale morning air rushed in, burning my lungs with life. I blinked hard against the light, only to see my father standing above me, immaculate in his pressed suit, his tie perfectly knotted. He looked down, not with horror or relief, but with irritation, as if my near death had been an inconvenience in his day. My body trembled violently as I dragged myself up, my face streaked with grime and frozen tears. He curled his lips into a smirk. "Do not exaggerate, Rachel," he said coldly. "It was just a joke." The words sliced sharper than knives. A joke. My suffering. My terror. My almost death. In that instant, I realized the truth. In this family, pain was comedy. Cruelty was tradition, and silence was the law. The Morgan family was the pride of our small Ohio community, admired for what everyone believed was stability, generosity, and honor. Yet, the version of us presented to the world was a carefully polished lie. My father, Daniel Morgan, at 55, carried himself like a pillar of respectability. He was a member of the hospital board, dressed in tailored suits, delivered speeches at church about family values, and wrote checks to local charities that carried our name in the newspaper. When neighbors waved at him, they saw a man who represented success, discipline, and virtue. What they did not see was the man who smirked as his daughters tore each other apart, the man who disguised cruelty as lessons, the man who controlled every breath in our house by reminding us that without him, we were nothing. My mother, Evelyn, at 52, floated in his shadow like a ghost. She smiled gently, offered neighbors cookies, sat quietly at fundraisers, and was praised as gracious. But her silence was the sharpest weapon in the Morgan household. She watched bruises bloom on my skin and called them accidents. She pressed cold rags to my swollen cheek and whispered, "Do not make a scene." Her life was devoted to keeping peace, which really meant keeping secrets. And then there was Victoria, my older sister, 23, who had stumbled out of community college, drifted through jobs, and found her comfort at the bottom of bottles and the center of every excuse. To outsiders, she was radiant and charming, the daughter who inherited our mother's looks, the one who drew attention at parties with her loud laugh. To me, she was torment disguised as family. She was the storm that never ended and the darling who was never punished. My father adored her, praised her as the heir to the Morgan name, excused her failures as youth, and scolded me for every hesitation. When she came home drunk and slammed doors, he laughed. When she demanded money, he lectured me about selfishness. When she shoved me until I fell, he called it sisters being sisters. Victoria's mistakes vanished under my father's protection while my efforts disappeared under his criticism. I was Rachel Morgan, 20 years old, a nursing student barely holding together tuition with overnight CNA shifts at the hospital. My hands smelled of disinfectant, and my body ached from lifting patients. But I pushed forward because I believed education was my escape. Yet in my father's house, even my ambition was twisted into arrogance. He reminded me often, "You would be nothing without this roof, without this family." Every word was a chain. Each day, I lived in a home that displayed framed portraits of perfection, smiling faces on church steps, my father's hand proud on Victoria's shoulder, my mother clutching her pearls, me always slightly behind with a plastered smile. To the community, we were flawless. To me, we were poison. The silence demanded at the dinner table, the silence demanded when doors slammed. The silence demanded when bruises appeared. It was the language of the Morgans. Silence to protect reputation. Silence to keep the mask intact. Silence to erase me. For years, I convinced myself maybe this was normal. Maybe every family had secrets. Maybe my role was simply to endure until graduation. But every glance at Victoria's smug grin, every dismissal from my father, every whispered "be quiet" from my mother, told me this was not normal. It was systemic control wrapped in the costume of respectability. I tried to focus on the future. At night, I studied under dim light until my eyes burned. I dreamed of working in hospitals where I could make a difference, where I could care for strangers with more compassion than I ever received at home. Yet each morning the truth returned with the sound of my father's polished shoes on hardwood floors and my sister's laughter echoing through the hallway. They were the rulers of a kingdom built on denial, and I was the prisoner. Outwardly, we were a family admired in Ohio. Inwardly, we were a stage play of cruelty, silence, and control. Memories have a way of resurfacing when you least want them, crawling out from the shadows to remind you of wounds that never fully closed. For me, those memories were stitched into every corner of the Morgan house. I remembered being 16 on the night before my chemistry final when Victoria barged into my room drunk and annoyed that I had ignored her call to watch a movie. She snatched my textbook from the desk and snapped it across my head, the sharp corner striking just above my ear. Stars burst behind my eyes as the room spun, and when I staggered down the hallway clutching my skull, my father looked up from his armchair and smirked. "Boys' roughhouse," he said, even though she was not a boy. "Stop being so sensitive, Rachel." I remembered another winter when I was 15 and Victoria pinned me down in the snow outside after church. She pressed my face into the frozen ground until I gasped, ice burning my skin, my chest seizing in panic. I thought I would pass out, but my mother finally pulled her off. Instead of outrage, she whispered sharply, "Do not make a scene. Rachel, she is just playing." I remembered birthday dinners that turned into humiliation contests. Victoria pouring soda over my hair, while guests laughed, my father waving it off as childish mischief. When I cried in the bathroom, my mother dabbed at my wet face and urged me to return to the table, whispering that harmony mattered more than pride. Each bruise was erased, each insult minimized, each scream silenced under the same refrain. Just sisters. Just fun. Do not exaggerate. Over the years, the pattern became clear. Victoria's anger was allowed to roam free, while my resistance was caged. When she failed her college classes, my father blamed the professors for not appreciating her creativity. When I earned top marks in anatomy, he told me not to gloat. When she lost jobs, he handed her money. When I worked overnight at the hospital, he told me I was neglecting family duties. The imbalance was suffocating, and yet I learned to swallow it because what else could I do? I had no money of my own beyond the small checks from CNA shifts. My loans already threatened to drown me. My father reminded me constantly that without his house, without his support, I would be living on the street. His words were shackles, and Victoria wielded those shackles like weapons. She would sneer, "You owe me, little nurse, Dad says so," every time she demanded cash or favors. The worst part was how I began to believe them. Gaslighting seeped deep until I questioned my own reality. Maybe I was too dramatic. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe being shoved down the stairs really was an accident. Maybe my sister screaming insults was just sibling rivalry. The culture of silence taught me to doubt myself until I no longer knew where truth ended and lies began. There were nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Victoria stumble in drunk, hearing my parents laugh lightly at her antics, while my own chest still ached from the bruises she left. I asked myself quietly, is this normal? Does every family hide this much behind closed doors? Does every mother choose silence over defense? Does every father reward cruelty over compassion? The answer grew slowly fed by my studies in nursing, where I learned about trauma patterns, signs of abuse, and the lasting effects of untreated injuries. I began to recognize my life in the textbook descriptions. The headaches after Victoria slammed the door into my head, the breathless panic when she shoved me into the snow, the trembling hands I hid under the desk in class. These were not signs of weakness, they were evidence of abuse. And still trapped by tuition bills and dependence, I endured. Survival became my only goal. Survive another night. Survive another exam. Survive another weekend of Victoria's parties spilling into the house. But survival was never enough in the Morgan family. Every day I carried the weight of knowing that to them, I was less than nothing, a scapegoat, a prop to highlight Victoria's brilliance. Every time I dared to question my father's voice returned like a verdict. Without us, you are nothing. It was a sentence harsher than prison. It was the mantra that bound me to a life I desperately wanted to escape. Those memories lived in my skin and bones, and they were the quiet storm gathering strength for what was to come. It always began with money. That Saturday morning, I came home from an overnight shift at the hospital, my scrubs wrinkled my eyes, burning with exhaustion. I wanted nothing more than to collapse on my bed, but Victoria was waiting in the kitchen, her hair tangled, her eyes bloodshot, the sour smell of alcohol clinging to her clothes. She waved one of my pay stubs in the air like a trophy. "You make more than you need," she spat, her voice slurred but sharp. "Give me half. I have debts." I backed away, clutching my backpack, my heart pounding. "That is my tuition, Victoria. Without it, I cannot stay in school." Her laugh was cruel high and mocking. "You think you are better than me, little nurse. You owe this family. You owe me." Before I could answer, my father's footsteps echoed across the tile. Daniel Morgan entered the kitchen with the authority of a judge. His eyes were cold as steel. "Family means sacrifice," he barked. "You are selfish, Rachel. You will give her what she needs." My chest tightened, fury rising, but strangled by years of conditioning. I wanted to scream that every sleepless night shift, every bruise from lifting patients, every dollar I saved was sacrifice. But in this house, my words were worthless. I lowered my eyes, silent. Victoria snatched $40 from my purse and stormed out with a smirk, while my father watched without a word of reproach. That was the moment the storm inside me began to crack the walls of silence. Weeks later, the pressure escalated. Victoria arrived home with a stack of loan papers, slamming them on the dining table in front of me. "Sign this," she ordered, her eyes wild, her hands trembling. My heart dropped as I scanned the words. A cosign for thousands of dollars money. I did not have risk I could not bear. "No," I whispered. "I cannot. This will ruin me." Her face twisted red with fury. She grabbed my wrist, squeezing until my skin burned. "You will sign," she hissed, spittle flying from her lips. My father appeared again, looming like a shadow behind her. "Do it," he commanded. "This family's survival depends on loyalty." My voice trembled but held. Loyalty does not mean slavery. It was the first time I had ever pushed back the first crack in years of silence. Victoria's grip tightened, her nails digging into my skin, but I refused to pick up the pen. Her rage boiled over. That night, when the house was quiet, she stumbled into my room, reeking of whiskey, her eyes blazing with drunken fury. Without warning, she yanked me by the arm, dragging me across the hallway, down the stairs, and into the garage. I screamed and kicked, but her strength, fueled by rage, was unstoppable. The trunk of the old sedan gaped open like a hungry mouth. Before I could fight her off, she shoved me inside, slamming it closed with a thud that shook through my bones. Darkness swallowed me again, pressing down like death itself. From outside, I heard my father's voice, calm and dismissive. "She is just joking, Rachel. Do not ruin the family reputation with your dramatics." Those words pressed harder on my chest than the metal trunk lid. My fists pounded. My voice cracked, but no one came. No one ever came. Hours crawled by in suffocating silence. My body curled in agony against the unforgiving steel, my breath coming in shallow bursts, tears freezing on my cheeks. My mother Evelyn peeked into the garage, once her figure a blur through the narrow slit of light near the hinge. I thought she would free me. Instead, she turned away, whispering something I could not hear, her face drawn with fear and resignation. That was when I understood fully that their silence was not protection. It was permission. Permission for Victoria to do worse, to push further, to break me completely. My family did not see me as a daughter. I was collateral, a scapegoat, a sacrifice for reputation. In that freezing coffin, I realized that survival alone was no longer enough. Something inside me shifted, a seed of resistance planted deep, quiet, but unyielding. They thought they had locked me into silence forever. They were wrong. The morning after that night in the trunk, I dragged myself to the hospital for another CNA shift. Every step sent jolts of pain through my ribs and shoulders, my breaths shallow as if knives pierced me from the inside. I thought I could hide it under my scrub top in a forced smile, the way I had hidden every injury for years. But Dr. Karen Hughes noticed the moment I walked through the ER doors. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and no nonsense. The kind of physician who had seen too many lies dressed up as clumsy accidents. She stopped me as I pushed a supply cart toward triage, her voice firm but not unkind. "Rachel, what happened to you?" I froze, clutching the cart. My instinct was to deny, to shrug, to laugh it off. "I am fine," I whispered, but even as I said it, I winced when the cart brushed my side. Karen tilted her head, studying me with unsettling precision. "You are not fine. You are struggling to breathe. Who did this?" Her words cut deeper than my father's threats because they were laced with genuine concern. For a moment, I wanted to tell her everything to collapse right there in the hallway and let someone else carry the truth. But years of conditioning wrapped around my throat like invisible hands, choking back the confession. "Please, just let it go," I begged. Karen did not press further in that moment, but I saw resolve flicker in her eyes. She was not fooled. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I replayed her words over and over. "Do not let silence bury you." They echoed louder than my father's commands and Victoria's taunts. For the first time in years, someone had looked at me, and not at the excuses. Someone had seen the bruises for what they were. The thought that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out began to grow inside me. Yet fear still held me prisoner. What if I spoke and no one believed me? What if my father used his influence on the hospital board to destroy my future? What if silence was the only thing keeping me safe? Those questions circled endlessly, but beneath them was the faintest spark of something I had not felt in years. Hope. That was when I began to act in secret. I started keeping my phone with me at all times, recording whenever arguments erupted. I captured my father's cold commands, Victoria's drunken threats, my mother's silence. I slipped my phone into my pocket and pressed record when Victoria demanded money, when my father accused me of selfishness, when my mother urged me to be quiet. Each file felt like a lifeline, fragile but real. I told myself one day these recordings might matter, that maybe proof would protect me where words could not. I also began taking photographs of bruises in the bathroom mirror, angling the phone so the yellow and purple marks along my ribs were clear under the light. I tucked the files into a hidden folder locked behind a password even Victoria could not guess. Each night, as I lay in bed, my body aching, I whispered silently to myself, "You are not crazy. This is real. These marks are evidence." It was a quiet rebellion, a small defiance against the fortress of silence that had ruled my life. They still saw me as weak as the obedient daughter who would never speak out, but I was building an arsenal piece by piece. And while fear still gnawed at me, a seed had been planted, a seed of resistance that would one day crack the walls they had built around me. The weeks that followed felt like walking across a frozen lake, every step threatening to crack beneath me, yet I kept moving because now I carried more than fear. I carried proof. Victoria's drunken tirades grew more reckless, her demands louder, her hands rougher, but each time I pressed record on my phone, the truth became harder to erase. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen, waving an empty bottle, slurring that I owed her for covering her car payment. When I refused, she slammed me against the counter, her fingers bruising my arms. My phone captured every word, her voice sharp and hateful. My father entering seconds later to say, "Do not provoke your sister Rachel. Do not embarrass us with your dramatics." The recording caught that too. Another day, she pounded on my bedroom door, screaming until I opened it, demanding $50. When I told her no, she slapped the cash from my wallet onto the floor and laughed, her voice rising like a victory bell. Again, my phone caught it all. Soon, the folder hidden deep in my phone, filled with audio files, each one a nail in the coffin of their excuses. Still, part of me feared it would never be enough until the day the universe handed me something undeniable. A week after another trunk incident, I stumbled into work, clutching my side. Dr. Karen Hughes insisted on an X-ray. I lay under the cold machine, my breath shallow, my mind racing with excuses I could use. But when the images appeared on the monitor, even my practiced lies fell silent. There, they were, jagged lines slicing across my ribs, 3 fractures, new and old proof, etched into bone. Karen's jaw tightened. "Rachel, these are not accidents. This is repeated trauma." She printed the films and placed them into my hands. These X-rays tell a story your family cannot erase. Do you understand? This is proof. My fingers shook as I held them, the reality almost too much to bear. For years I had questioned myself, convinced maybe I was clumsy or dramatic. But the truth stared back at me in black and white. My body had been a battlefield, and the scars were testimony. Karen did not stop there. She scheduled a CT scan, which revealed older injuries healing fractures that matched the headaches I had endured after Victoria's blows. The radiologist confirmed the pattern, consistent with ongoing abuse. My stomach churned, but deep inside, I felt something new, something solid. Evidence. Days later, another piece arrived from an unexpected source. A police officer visited the hospital carrying surveillance footage from a gas station near our house. The grainy video clearly showed Victoria dragging me by the arm, shoving me into the trunk while I kicked and thrashed. The timestamp matched the freezing night I thought I would not survive. There was no way to twist this, no way to call it clumsy or playful. It was abuse in motion, captured for the world to see. I stared at the screen, horrified yet relieved. Horror because my nightmare replayed before strangers. Relief because finally I was not alone. Finally, someone else could see it too. Each piece stacked upon the next. Audio files, photographs of bruises, X-rays, CT scans, surveillance footage. Together they formed a wall stronger than any denial. At night, I sat in my room scrolling through the folder, tears burning my eyes. For so long, silence had been my cage. Now evidence was becoming my weapon. They had laughed at my pain, dismissed my cries, twisted my reality. But these files did not laugh. These images did not dismiss. These scans did not lie. Proof was louder than silence, and with every click of the camera, every record button pressed, every film printed, my voice grew steadier. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, their empire of lies could finally crumble. The call came on a gray Thursday afternoon while I was restocking linens in the ER. Detective Michael Carter introduced himself in a voice that was steady and clipped the tone of someone who had seen more than enough darkness but still carried resolve. He asked to meet in a private room. My stomach dropped as I followed him, the folder of X-rays and scans heavy in my hands. He set a recorder on the table, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Rachel, I need you to start from the beginning." My throat tightened, fear clawing up, but then I saw Dr. Hughes hovering in the doorway, her nod steady like an anchor. Slowly, haltingly at first, I spoke. I told him about Victoria's drinking, her demands for money, the slaps, the bruises, the suffocating silence my parents demanded. I told him about the nights in the trunk, about my father's dismissive words, about my mother's whispered, "Be quiet for peace." At first, the words felt foreign on my tongue. Secrets I had never dared to speak aloud, but once they started, they poured out faster, years of silence breaking loose. Carter listened without interruption, jotting notes, his jaw tightening at certain details. When I paused, trembling, he leaned forward. "Why did you stay, Rachel?" His question pierced straight through me. Shame prickled my skin. Because I could not afford to leave. Because my father made me believe I was nothing without him. Because I thought silence would keep me safe. His gaze softened. "That is what abusers want you to think. But you are not responsible for their actions." His words made my chest ache with a strange relief, like a weight I had carried alone was finally being lifted. He collected the evidence carefully, each item sealed in evidence bags, each one another brick in the wall between me and my family's control. Before leaving, he handed me a card. "This is my direct line. If they try to intimidate you, you call me. You are not alone anymore." That phrase echoed in my head louder than my father's voice had ever done. Yet the Morgans did not surrender quietly. That evening, my father stormed into the hospital demanding to see me, his voice booming through the hallway like thunder. "How dare you keep me from my daughter? This is family business." But for the first time, security guards stood between us. I glimpsed him through the crack of the door, red-faced fists clenched, shouting at the nurse's station. My mother trailed behind her eyes, red whispering to calm him, never to defend me. Victoria was absent, likely hiding from the scrutiny, now that evidence was undeniable. My body trembled, but my spirit did not collapse. For once, his authority did not silence me. The law was listening now. Days later, at the police station, the confrontation escalated. My father paced in the lobby like a caged animal, his tie askew, his voice rising in fury. "My daughter is exaggerating. She is destroying our family name." His words ricocheted off the walls, but no one flinched because the officers had already seen the evidence. Then Victoria arrived. She smelled of alcohol even before the door swung open. She tried to push past the front desk, her voice slurred. "I need to see my sister. She will tell you the truth." The officer blocked her firmly. "Step back, miss." Her face twisted with rage. "She is lying. She always lies. You cannot keep me from her." She lunged, but two more officers restrained her. Through the glass, I watched as her eyes darted wildly until they landed on me. For the first time, the smug arrogance vanished, replaced with something raw. Fear. She shouted my name, demanding I defend her, but I stayed silent, my body rigid. I did not move toward her. I did not save her. The predator had become the prey. Meanwhile, my mother sat in the corner, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Tears streaked her face, yet she said nothing, did not defend me nor them. She simply sat broken between loyalty and guilt. My father turned on her, barking, "Say something, Evelyn, tell them it is not true." But she shook her head weakly, eyes fixed on the floor. For once, even she could not smooth the wreckage. When officers called me in, I walked past my father, feeling his glare like daggers. "Do you realize what you are doing to this family?" he hissed. I lifted my chin and answered evenly, "I am telling the truth." Inside the interrogation room, I repeated my story in detail. Every bruise, every dismissal, every night of silence. Carter's recorder captured it all, his nods steady, his notes precise. When I finished, I felt emptied yet lighter, as if the weight of years had finally been set down. Outside, I could still hear my father arguing with the captain, threatening lawsuits, invoking his position, but each demand grew weaker as he realized reputation meant little against hard evidence. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper, a place where truth and lies were stripped bare under fluorescent lights. I sat at the witness stand, my palms sweating as I gripped the edge of the chair, staring at the rows of faces. My father sat stiffly beside his attorney, his jaw clenched, his suit immaculate, though the dark circles under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. Victoria was hunched beside a public defender, her once arrogant shoulders slumped, her eyes darting nervously around the room. My mother sat behind them, clutching a tissue, her expression vacant as if she had been hollowed out. The judge entered, and everyone rose, the shuffle of footsteps echoing like thunder. My chest tightened. This was the moment where silence would either consume me again or finally break. The prosecutor began by presenting the evidence. The X-rays and CT scans were projected on a large screen for all to see. Cracks in my ribs lit up like highways, the healing fractures shadows of forgotten battles. The room was silent as the radiologist explained how these injuries could not come from clumsiness, how they formed a pattern consistent with repeated abuse. The photographs followed images of bruises across my torso and arms, purple and yellow in ugly blossoms. I wanted to shrink into myself, ashamed and exposed, but I forced my chin up. These were not marks of weakness. They were proof. Then came the footage from the gas station. The grainy video flickered with the image of Victoria dragging me toward the sedan, shoving me into the trunk while I fought to escape. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My father shifted uncomfortably, his attorney whispering furiously in his ear, but no argument could erase what everyone had just seen. When it was my turn to testify, my legs trembled as I stood, but Detective Carter's steady gaze anchored me. I told the court about years of abuse, about the bruises dismissed, about the suffocating silence enforced in my home. My voice wavered at first, but then it strengthened, fueled by the memory of freezing nights in the trunk. "It was not fun," I said, staring directly at my father. "It was violence, and I survived." The prosecutor nodded with approval. The defense tried to undermine me, painting me as dramatic, insisting that siblings fight and that my injuries could have come from sports or accidents. But the evidence weighed heavier than their words. Dr. Hughes testified with calm authority, confirming her medical opinion that my injuries were signs of repeated trauma. The radiologist backed her with professional certainty. Detective Carter explained the chain of custody of the recordings and video. Piece by piece, the case built into a wall my father's influence could not topple. My father's attorney attempted to salvage his reputation, calling neighbors to the stand who described him as generous a man of integrity, yet even their rehearsed praise faltered when cross-examined. Could generosity erase X-rays? Could integrity erase video footage? The contradictions hung in the air like smoke. When the prosecutor replayed the audio of my father saying, "Do not ruin the family reputation," the courtroom shifted. It was no longer only about my sister's violence. It was about a household that had chosen silence and image over a daughter's safety. I watched jurors exchange glances, their faces hardening with realization. The weight of years pressed down on me, yet I felt lighter than ever. Speaking the truth out loud in front of strangers, in front of the ones who had silenced me, was like tearing off chains link by link. My father stared at me with eyes that once made me shrink, but now his glare felt powerless. My sister avoided my gaze entirely, her hands twisting in her lap. My mother's tears fell silently into her tissue, her shoulders shaking, but still no words left her lips. The judge's gavel struck after hours of deliberation. The sentence was clear. Victoria was given 2 years of probation, mandatory rehabilitation for substance abuse, and a restraining order forbidding her from contacting me. My father was stripped of his position on the hospital board, his reputation shredded in the community. My mother received probation for failing to protect me and was ordered into counseling. The verdict rang in my ears like a bell of liberation. For years, their laughter had drowned me, their gaslighting had silenced me, but now the gavel spoke louder than them all. As I left the courtroom, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward. For the first time, I did not lower my head. I walked out with my shoulders back, breathing air that felt cleaner than anything I had inhaled in years. Behind me, I heard Victoria call my name, her voice breaking, but I did not turn. My father muttered to his lawyer, his face ashen, his empire crumbling. My mother wept quietly into her hands. None of it mattered now. Justice had been carved into the record for all to see. The silence after the verdict was unlike any silence I had known in the Morgan household. It was not the suffocating silence my parents had demanded for years. It was the heavy silence of consequence settling over people who had never believed it would come. Victoria stood with her head bowed as the judge delivered the terms of her probation. 2 years under supervision, mandatory rehabilitation for substance abuse, a restraining order that kept her a full 100 yards away from me at all times. Her public defender tried to frame it as an opportunity for redemption, but everyone in the courtroom saw it for what it was, a fall from the pedestal she had stood on her entire life. My father's punishment was not time in a cell, but it cut deeper. He was stripped of his position on the hospital board, the very image he had spent decades curating, torn apart in one afternoon. The whispers began immediately, colleagues already questioning how a man who preached family values could watch his daughter nearly frozen in a car trunk. The headlines that followed made sure his name was no longer synonymous with charity, but with hypocrisy. My mother's sentencing was quieter, yet just as damning. Probation for failing to protect me, counseling sessions mandated by the court, a reminder that silence in the face of abuse is complicity. For once, her tears were not enough to smooth the cracks. The consequences extended beyond the courtroom. The local news stations replayed the footage from the gas station on loop, the grainy image of Victoria dragging me into the trunk broadcast into living rooms across Ohio. Reporters lingered outside the courthouse asking neighbors for comment. Many expressed shock, saying they had never guessed such things could happen behind the Morgan family's polished facade. Others admitted they had wondered about the bruises, the whispers, the tension, but had been too afraid to question. My father's colleagues distanced themselves swiftly. The hospital board issued a statement condemning his actions and his silence. The charity circles my mother had once commanded with gentle smiles now closed their doors. Invitations dried up. The Morgan name no longer opened doors, it slammed them shut. At home, the walls that had once echoed with Victoria's laughter and my father's commands now stood empty. I did not return, but I heard from distant relatives that the house grew quiet, oppressive in its stillness. Without reputation to protect and adoration to feed on, my parents were left with nothing but each other's hollow company. Victoria entered rehab reluctantly. Letters trickled to me later, scrawled apologies in shaky handwriting. I opened one out of curiosity, but the words rang hollow. "I never meant to hurt you. I was sick." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer unopened since. Apologies did not erase years of cruelty, and forgiveness was not something owed. My father never wrote his pride too shattered to put pen to paper. Rumors spread that he spent his days pacing the house, snapping at anyone who dared speak of the trial. My mother sent short messages, half apologies, half pleas, but I learned to read them without absorbing the guilt. They were hers to carry, not mine. For me, the sentencing was liberation. The restraining order meant I could walk home from class without scanning the street for Victoria. The loss of my father's position meant I no longer had to fear his influence crushing my future. The public nature of the verdict meant the truth was no longer mine to guard alone. It was carved into records, spoken aloud, impossible to erase. As I stepped out of the courthouse that day into a sea of cameras and questions, I felt the cold air sting my face not as punishment, but as freedom. For years, they had said it was just fun, just drama, just sisters. The judge had said it clearly. Violence. And the community had listened. That word became the stone that toppled the fortress of silence they had built. Their world was crumbling, but mine was only beginning. When the courthouse doors closed behind me, the world felt different, brighter, sharper, as if the air itself had been scrubbed clean. I no longer carried the crushing weight of silence. I was not simply a girl locked in a trunk or a daughter told to be quiet for peace. I was Rachel Morgan, survivor, witness, and student who had reclaimed her own voice. Megan, my closest friend since freshman year of nursing school, was waiting outside her small hatchback parked against the curb. She rushed to me, arms wide open, her eyes fierce with pride. "You are safe now," she whispered, and for the first time I believed it. We drove away from the courthouse, and the further the building shrank in the rearview mirror, the lighter I felt. I packed my few belongings into 2 suitcases and left the Morgan house without looking back. The portraits on the walls, the polished smiles, the suffocating silence, all of it stayed behind. Megan cleared a corner of her small apartment for me, our bedroom crowded with laundry baskets and textbooks, but to me it was freedom. No slammed doors, no cruel laughter echoing at night, no footsteps that made me flinch. At night, I lay awake not from fear, but from the strange quiet of safety, a silence that soothed instead of suffocated. Therapy became my anchor. Each session was painful, excavating years of gaslighting, peeling away the lies that had been layered over my memories. My counselor reminded me again and again, "You are not dramatic. You are not selfish. You are not weak. You are a survivor." Slowly, I began to believe her. I started to see my scars not as shame, but as testimony. I framed one of the X-ray images and set it on my desk not as a reminder of pain, but as proof that truth could be carved into bone and still be revealed. My CNA shifts at the hospital took on new meaning. Every patient I lifted, every chart I filled, felt like a step toward independence. Exhaustion from effort was nothing like exhaustion from fear. I saved each paycheck determined to fund my tuition without leaning on anyone else. Months passed and the world around me shifted. Victoria sent letters from rehab written in shaky cursive apologies tangled with excuses. I opened one, read it once, and tucked it away. Forgiveness was not owed. My father avoided me entirely. His pride shattered, his influence diminished. The hospital board moved forward without him, his name now a cautionary tale. My mother sent occasional texts filled with regret, but I no longer absorbed the guilt. Her silence had been her choice, and its weight belonged to her, not me. Megan became my chosen family. We studied late into the night, laughed over cheap pizza, dreamed about the nurses we would become. In her company, I discovered what family should feel like: safe, encouraging, unconditional. Healing was not linear. There were nights when I woke sweating from nightmares of the trunk mornings when memory pressed heavily on my chest, but each time I reminded myself that the worst was behind me, carved into evidence, judged in public, closed forever. My future was mine to build. 6 months later, I stood at the front of a lecture hall, palms steady as I adjusted the microphone. Rows of nursing students sat before me, their faces young and eager, reminding me of myself before everything unraveled. Behind me on the projector glowed the X-ray image of my fractured ribs. I took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I was not standing here as a student or a speaker. I was lying in a hospital bed, terrified, with my body telling the truth my voice could not. These images do not just show broken bones. They show years of silence of abuse, disguised as jokes of a family's reputation placed above a daughter's safety. The room was hushed. I told them about mandated reporting, about the courage it took for Dr. Hughes to insist on the truth about Detective Carter, who listened without judgment about how evidence can speak when words are smothered. As future nurses, I said you may be the first to see signs of abuse. Trust your instincts. Ask the hard questions. You may be the only one who can give someone a voice. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, but the sound that lingered with me was the quiet sob of a young woman in the front row. She approached afterward, her hands shaking. Your story helped me understand my patient, she whispered. I think she is being hurt at home. Now I know I need to speak up. In that moment, I knew my pain had found purpose. Later that evening, I returned to Megan's apartment, where the smell of pasta simmering filled the air and laughter floated through the walls. On my desk sat a letter from my parents. I opened it slowly, the handwriting my mother's. Dear Rachel, we watched your interview on the local news. We are deeply sorry for failing you, for not protecting you when you needed us most. Your courage forced us to face our own failures. I folded the letter and set it aside. Their remorse was theirs to carry. My healing did not depend on their guilt. Instead, I glanced at the X-rays framed on my wall, not as reminders of trauma, but as testaments to survival. They had called it just sister fun. The judge had called it violence. I called it my rebirth. Standing at the window that night with the city lights glowing like scattered stars, I whispered to myself, I am not just surviving anymore. I am living. The silence around me was finally the right kind of silence, the silence of peace, of freedom, of justice that had been won and could never again be taken.